Alrighty, everybody. Well, welcome back. We hope that break was good for you, that you were able to get into the exhibitor booth, maybe chat with some of the exhibitors, talk with them, just really see how they can help you and how they can help you move forward, all of the different tools, resources, knowledge that they can provide to you. So for this next panel, creating an innovative product really is only half the battle. Just like G.I. Joe always said, it's only part of what you're going to face. You need to also be able to sell that product to somebody. You have to figure out what drives your customer, why they need it, what it's going to do for them. Essentially, what is it, who cares, and ultimately, why do they care? So in this panel session, you're going to get some key information on how to go forward through this process. Now I'd like to kick off our second panel, Commercializing Your Innovation, moving beyond a Phase 2 award moderated by Scott Maloney. So Scott is the Chief Innovator at Arrowhead Center with the responsibility of moving technologies into industry through partnership negotiations and ventures. Scott is a third-generation entrepreneur, guest lecturer at major universities, keynote speaker, consultant, innovator in residence to a major startup incubator, and board member for several large companies. He's going to be joined by other panelists Eric Frahm, Doug Goodman, Patricia Knighten, and Richard McNamara, once Richard is able to join us. Now, please give your attention to Scott as he leads the panel. Scott, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Del. We're really excited to be here today to talk about, as Del had mentioned, the commercialization of ideas. It really is one of the hallmarks of the SBIR, STTR process. We're going to get into today a lot of the facets that make that challenging, make that exciting, and make that really an important step as we think about moving beyond that Phase 2 SBIR stage, or rather that commercialization moment where things start to scale. We've got some tremendous panelists here, and I'd like to start off by giving just a moment to everyone here to introduce themselves properly. In the world of COVID, where we're on screen here, I've found that often the easiest way to do this is to simply go in the order that you've popped onto my screen. I'll call out your name, and then if you wouldn't mind giving us just a couple of minutes of your background. Doug, you happen to be the first one on my screen.
No problem. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. My name is Doug Goodman. I'm here representing NASA. I'm actually with Jacobs Technology. And what I do is I work in the Johnson Space Center's SBIR office. There I do a lot of outreach coordination, work with our handbooks with helping people out, and that's all been on the side, but also conducting some of our outreach.
Great. Thank you, Doug. We're delighted to have you here. Patricia, you're next.
Hi. Isn't that funny, the order on the screen, because we're not at all in the same order. So my name's Patricia Knighton. I live in Albuquerque, and probably just like anyone else in Albuquerque, enjoying a brilliant sunny day. And I have been in the New Mexico tech economic ecosystem for many, many years. I right now practice out of my home, as everyone does, a consulting firm, and but I have done many, many SBIRs way back with early stage licenses out of Sandia, and actually more recently with commercial companies. They're always part of the business strategy of the tech startups, and I've been involved with that. My background, in addition to that, has a lot to do with business development, a lot in the government market. So I do come with a perspective of developing work and business and customers in the Department of Defense and other large government agencies.
Great. Thank you, Patricia. We're delighted to have you. Eric, you're next.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. My name is Eric Frahm. I have a career in the Air Force that started out as a pilot, and then from there I moved into kind of this intersection of technology and strategy for the latter half of my career. Worked with Los Alamos and Sandia a fair amount on some non-proliferation issues and some directed energy research, and then moved into Air Force Research Lab, where I worked on multi-domain command and control, and then launched a program that was deep into revolutionizing pilot training And then from there, I was the Chief Product Officer for Air Education Training Command, where oversaw innovation efforts for the entirety of the Air Force's recruiting, training, and education portfolio. And while in that job, I moved down to Austin, Texas, and was involved with standing up the AppWorks Austin hub there, where we also completely remade the Air Force's SBIR program. So I got to reach back into the lab and work with the great folks at the AFRL Small Business Office as we remade that program. And so since that time, I've now started a small business of my own called ProVio, where we help startups and Series A, Series B stage companies, so a little bit more than a startup, transition their technology while accessing non-dilutive capital from the government. So we really work hard at not just advising on how to get a win, although that's certainly something that we do a lot of, but really which win do you actually want, and making sure that it's a deeper connection with your overall business strategy, and then helping to transition that into government and into commercial industry, finding investors, all of that sort of stuff.
That's great, Eric. Thank you. We have one other panelist, Richard McNamara, we hope will be joining us shortly, but I'd like to dive right into the questions if I could and start chatting. We're going to get into the topics of what are some of the challenge areas around that inflection moment after phase 2. We're going to get into some of the challenges around scaling companies, but I'd like to just set the stage first. There are usually a lot of basics that we can all agree on when it comes to building out like a very healthy pipeline of commercial potential for any idea. What do you think of when we think of those facets of that healthy pipeline commercialization, and what does success in a new venture look like for each one of you from your positions?
Shall we do this in order?
Yeah. Well, by all means, I'd love to have just a normal conversation, or at least as close as we can. So please jump right in.
So I'll start us off. So I think that doing this the right way, and keeping with the topic of the conversation here with government funding, I think it's really about a combination in this context of having a clear idea of who your government customer is, how they're going to use your product, what your commercial customer is, and how they're going to use it. But then also having a really clear, well-defined technology roadmap that you may not have all the answers, you may not have the technology developed, you may just have an idea, that's fine. But what are the major obstacles? What are the major questions you're going to have to answer between A and B? And then starting to take a look at what are the opportunities both in and outside of government that can give you the wherewithal to go answer those questions. So sometimes that's money. A lot of times it's money. A lot of times it's also talent, where you're going to source the talent. And it's also about equipment or lab space or other things that you're going to need to get your project off the ground.
Wonderful, wonderful. Doug, Patricia, any additional thoughts on healthy pipeline? And then I'd like to pause for 2 seconds and I'll allow Richard to introduce himself as we finish up this question.
Sure. So as far as a healthy pipeline on our end, one of the things is, I got to say, for the SBIR at NASA, we really focus now, say the pipeline, the way we see it, is working through those phase 1, phase 2s onto the post phase 2s, right? And so it begins there. Our pipeline begins with it. And this year, keeping in mind the economy that's going on, the situation we're all in, NASA chose to do something a little differently, okay? Normally, unlike some of the other large agencies, we only do one solicitation every year. Just one. It usually comes out in January. Everything's due in March, that kind of a rhythm to it. We did that in January of 2020. We had one come out. And then we had a second one. It actually started in November, and everything's due, I believe, January 8th. So when I look at the pipeline, I say, yeah, we're doing what we can to get money back into the small businesses that are needing it. So that solicitation is open and ongoing as we speak. Now, when it comes to successes for us are often defined as either an infusion or as a commercialization. Okay, infusions can be anything from, I know people like to think that when NASA infuses something, that means it was put on a rocket and flown up to the station. And I love that. We all love that infusion, but often people forget infusions can also be that a product was developed, it was used in a lab, or was maybe used in astronaut training or in a project or something like that. Commercialization can be everything from a patent to licenses being sold to, that the company's being purchased. So we see a lot of different successes when we're doing our work on this.
That's really great, Doug. I appreciate that. Patricia, I'm particularly interested in your perspective on this of creating that healthy pipeline, because I know in the past you and I have chatted a little bit about this.
Sure. So, I live by the philosophy, begin with the end in mind. And when you're looking at a product, I know it's old-fashioned, but it's still true, right? The end in mind philosophy. And when you're looking at a product, that really can get stripped down into all kinds of things. Like and most of all, the user and the user community and stakeholders to get there. So I like to break things down. I like to put frameworks in place that kind of help us understand where we're going to be and who they're going to be using. Great example, Air Force, the research labs let a lot of those contracts, but the users in the work I've done most recently was the logistics and sustainment community. And if you look at the life cycle of a weapon system, they couldn't be farther apart. And they do hardly communicate. I want to say hardly because that's historical. Everyone's getting much better, and everybody knows with Dr. Roper's influence today that the logistics and sustainment communities where the bucks really need to go. And there's a lot of technology-rich opportunities. But if we were to maneuver and only rely on our TPOC for a phase 1 or 2 to get there, we'd still be struggling to figure what that looks like. So looking long range at the user community and the stakeholders to get there and understanding what it looks like all the way down to what are the hardware requirements or industrial codes that need to get met. That's really important to know early because it can cost significant money, certainly will cost a lot of engineering resources. So if that's not planned well in advance, you're still sort of floating in this world of I've got this great thing and it's looking better and better. But what does it look like when it's real and happening? And what do those users look like? That's how I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, Patricia. And you really set the stage perfectly for where I'd like our next question to go. But before we do, I'd like to pause for just 30 seconds. Richard McNamara has been able to join us as one of our esteemed panelists here. Richard, could I put you on the spot for 30 seconds to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, I had, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, I had a 40-year career with the Department of the Navy, and I was primarily in the submarine business for electronics, submarines, torpedoes, all that sort of stuff. And when I retired, I was responsible for basically all the acquisition of that in the PEO structure the Navy has. During that period of time, the last 15 or 18 years of it, I got engaged with the SBIR program, saw how much it had to offer, and by the time I retired, we had moved over $1 billion into the phase 3 transition, really into the operational fleet, and changed, really was an agent of change for some of the adoption of commercial off-the-shelf technologies. Much more rapid philosophy, change out, and logistics lifecycle support. Since then, since I retired, the Navy's kept me around to do outreach and try to, engage small business and get them engaged with Navy Department SBIR. And then I also try to do inReach, which is where I try to educate the program managers, the value of the program and how it can help them satisfy their overall mission requirements. And as long as they keep asking me to come back, I'll keep showing up. So.
Well, thank you, Richard. We're delighted to have you on the panel with everyone else here. Patricia, I'd like to riff off of your last comment here just a little bit around those kind of challenge points, and it gets us down the road where I wanted to go. We generally think about the transition from a phase 2 to a phase 3 or that equivalent throughout the SBIR life cycle as the Valley of Death. And despite its kind of morbid moniker, it really is because that's the first commercial moment, and that can be very scary and be fraught with a lot of different problems. There seems to be a lot of challenges, regardless of who your customer is, in bridging that phase 2 to phase 3 moment of commercialization. I'd like to hear from all of you a little bit on what is the one thing that you think causes people to fall into that valley of death or get stuck in that transition moment, and how can they build a bridge to get over that?
Well, it really is ironic, but what I find is that nobody plans for success. Okay. I think Patricia started out with starting with the end in mind. That's true, but I took what I find so often is that people are surprised that, wow, this small company made this stuff all happen and it works, and now what am I going to do with it? And they've done no preparation. There's no budget to transition it. There's been no acquisition documentation put in place to transition it. And so as a result, you have this great idea that has demonstrated a phase 1, gone to phase 2, and so the thing that SBA did is we put in a second phase 2 commercialization readiness program. But even with that, getting somebody to have the time and have the acquisition documentation so you can purchase it and the money in place to spend on that contract is often just never thought about. And you've got to think about that. Think about the end in mind. You've got to ask the tough questions. Who's going to authorize this? Who's got the money and what budget? Those are questions that have to come up. What I have found more recently is that GSA now will do phase 3 awards, and I work with phase 3 through GSA. 105 days for like a $5 million, fixed price contract. Just did a $29.5 million with them in less than 6 months. And so traditionally we're in the 15, 18 month window. So there are other avenues to try to build that bridge across it if people have the money. The last item I would say is take a good look at other things like man-tech, manufacturing technologies, a lot of the industrial policies within the Department of Defense really promoting, make America, build in America, bring it back up. I think they call it reshoring is the term. But there are a number of those projects around that can be piggybacked on.
That's great, Richard. Thank you. Patricia, you kind of got us going on this topic. Any thoughts?
Well, I'll now modify, envision success and begin with that in mind. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Richard, for that comment. So I do all of those things, and commercialization, hate to tell the R&D community, but commercialization is selling. Sorry, it's the S word, but there's just no other way to look at it, right? I mean, you gotta sell, people gotta buy it. So whether you're gonna call it selling or not, the transaction that has to happen is what you've got to plan for. And that transaction, I call it selling. And it's a big game in a large complex. It's a different game. There's people who spend their lives. I was lucky. In my earliest career, joined a very large defense weapons system program development, and I was around a lot. I got a lot of mentoring. They didn't know they were mentoring me, but I watched those guys, and they were good. They were good. They were good at looking the customer in the eye. They were good at asking questions. They were good at being humble enough while you're out there being a cool guy, you're still humble enough to get that information. And if you don't have that information, you just got a road to nowhere. So picking up on the technology roadmap idea, that is, I mean, it's a map, and it truly is. So I think that's a really important part of understanding your stakeholder mindset, your user mindset. Today's world calls it customer discovery. We called it exploration back then. It's the important move, and it's time intensive, it's labor intensive, it can be resource intensive from the standpoint of travel. If your state, like New Mexico, if you're lucky and you have an SBIR matching grant program from the Economic Development Department, those can be very helpful tools for things that can help you get in front of customers. So keep that in mind.
That's great. Thank you.
And I want to add on to it because it's when talking about these, I know NASA has a couple of programs because it's one of the concerns we have is that valley of death. And one of the things is I always like to tell people, really, NASA, we're smaller. We're not DOD. We're not one of some of these others. But for them, it's just when you're looking at it, a lot of these get a little more personal. I think that's my opinion. We have champions. We have people the person who's in this is usually someone who's really invested in it. They've gone through, they've done the research, and this is what they want to be in, right? This is something they want to pursue. So when we're talking about these things, it's important to keep that in mind. And it's also, when they're doing it, we've got these two programs. One is the Phase 2E program. It's a Phase 2 extension that we use. It's a one-to-one matching, I believe, up to $375K. And the goal here, what we're hoping, is that usually working between the company and the Corps, the Corps, y'all are talking, what is the technology, where are we seeing this being applied to? Because we may have a broad field, right? NASA likes to do whenever it puts out a solicitation and it talks about the focus areas, these are all done in very broad terms. They're not going to say we need a 6-sided box because everybody's going to give them a 6-sided box. They really need those creative answers, right? So when it comes to this, they're looking at these and hopefully working with the different projects throughout NASA to be able to funnel you, to get the companies and the advanced technologies into that commercialization end, right? Now, the other program that we have is the CCRPP program, which I believe Richard's mentioned earlier. Ours, we just had it. Again, we're trying to get money out there to people. So it started actually in, I think, October 26th, and the solicitation for it ended in December 9th or 6th. Mm. So unfortunately, it's over. We've got it out there. But what I'd say is it's one that I think it's up to $3 million. And one of the things I always like to tell people, because people don't think is, a lot of our dollars they seem kind of small. We talk about, it's $125K for a Phase 1, or it's, $750K for the Phase 2. And I know those aren't millions and millions. The CCRPP one at NASA can be up to $3 million, and that's one-to-one matching. So it's a bigger project can come in, and you don't necessarily have to have gone through NASA originally. It's something where you could have worked with DOD or somebody else. And if you've got that investor and they're wanting to put it in, we can go ahead and put it in there. I think the minimum requirement is a Phase 2 on that one, though. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's just a couple of different ways that you can go in for NASA's looking to try and work with the Valley of Death.
Great.
Well, I appreciate that, Eric.
I think the big thing is you need to understand that to do this right, you need to be building a business, not conducting research, although research is a component of that. And it's not even just building a product. You need to be building a total business. And that means putting together, obviously the basis of that is going to be a sound research and development arm. But you need to be connecting it to sales. You need to be connecting it to the customer. The customer is not just the Corps; it's also the Corps' boss, and the Corps' boss's boss. The people who own the budget, who make the decisions, who aren't going to be swayed just by the Corps being excited about the product that you built, because the Corps' job is to deliver success. So of course they think it's great. What is it that's going to advance the real mission here, and thinking about it that way. Similarly, on the commercial side. Understanding the true business challenge, the pain point. I would bet that virtually all the audience here were B2B type companies or ideas. So what is the business pain point we're solving, and what is the value of that, and how do we connect that? How do we message it? These are non-technical things. These are soft skills, and they take real skill. They take real effort to get right. And you have to probably be putting together a team to do that. Basically, as soon as you make that first, R&D types have somebody bring in. as we talk about budget, that needs to be a part of your plan. You need to be thinking about the overhead to lay in these sorts of tasks on top of your R&D to move it forward.
Great comments. I appreciate last time Patricia set us up going forward, and this time, Eric, you did a fantastic job with that. I appreciate it. I'd like to come right back to you, Eric, with our next kind of piece. I'm hearing selling helps us bridge that gap to Richard's point, plan for success, creative paths forward, and I love your last point, Eric, around build a business, not just a research enterprise. Those are all the productive, forward-looking things we're doing to bridge that gap. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the traps. As individuals are thinking about that commercial moment, as they're thinking about that transition, Eric, let's start with you. Where do you see a lot of companies really get bogged down or stuck in the muck needlessly?
I think it's about, and I guess I should start by saying there is nothing wrong with building a business that does research at all.
Right.
But just understand that's what your business is. It's doing research, and what's the product then? The product is something that's ready to commercialize that you're then going to spin out to somebody else. So there's your customer, right? So you need to be thinking about, who are the networks I need to be engaging with. If that's the case, if you're a PhD and you love the research, and that's what you want to do, fantastic. Go find a network of investors who can create businesses out of ideas. That's a thing. But I think where people get stuck in the mud is when they don't necessarily realize that that's the business they actually want to run, or if on the other hand, they're busy selling something that doesn't actually exist. That there's the other problem too. So it's really about knowing who you are, knowing the strengths of the stage that your company is in, and having a team that can actually hit within that sweet spot. If you're trying to be the next Google or Facebook or whatever, that's great. Nothing wrong with that either. But you need to understand the major stepping stones that need to come in there. Don't be working step one when you're step five.
Great, thank you. Well, Patricia, did I hear you start to speak?
I can. I don't think
No.
I'm not muting my. Is it? I keep forgetting to mute, but I'm on. So it's a great discussion because there's so much of that is so important. Building a business, whether it's R&D or product. I've recently been working with a company that went into commercial aerospace first and then went defense. And you may get that a 747, a 737 is a magnificent aircraft, but it does a mission that's not hard. Flying across the ocean and with a load of people and cargo is not hard compared to what military aircraft do. So it's a harder market to enter from the standpoint of aviation, and that's what we were working in. And there were so many picking up on the industry associations. You had the non-destructive test community. You actually had the wheel community. You had the engine community. There were a lot of communities of relevance. And by the way, aviation, and this is my moment to acknowledge the passing of Brigadier General Chuck Yeager yesterday, and that he was of a generation that was high risk in aviation. Those guys, if you've ever been around test pilots, and you probably have, Eric, they just jump in anything. And back in the 50s, they were jumping in anything. There was no modeling and simulation. That's who that guy was. That was the aviation culture. It was a magnificent time. Now, no one wants to see an air crash, right? It's the worst thing in the world. And they go out of their way to prevent that. So we've got a very conservative community. I got a little off topic, but what I'm saying is there were a lot of thresholds to come through in the business plan. It had to be part of the business plan. It had to be a milestone to surpass that level of uncertainty or risk that would allow our customers to adopt. So it can draw a very deep and big web of activities. And if it's not part of your business and you don't want to be in that business, then finding a partner or taking an alternative path is definitely recommended.
That's a great perspective. Richard, I'd like to bounce it over to you for the same question. Where do you see some of these companies getting stuck in the muck as they're moving forward, or things to avoid?
Well, when you get a lot of smart guys working on a particular technology, they do get very focused on that. And it's kind of like they never lift their head up to look around and say, why is somebody paying me to do this? And usually it's to solve a problem. And I'll call that the quest for perfection. And they don't move away to make it practical. Whereas on the other hand, there are situations where you need to do that. Okay. On the other hand, we also look at saying, hey, give me 80% of the solution today, because it's more valuable than what I have. And I'll wait for the 100% solution in 5 years. But give me 80% today, so I'm at least 80% better than I am currently. And an example of that was, luckily, hopefully it's in our rearview mirror, but the improvised explosive devices that we saw when we went over into the Middle East the first time. And we had the counter IED systems. Well, those were saying, hey, I've got nothing now. Here's 20%. Here's 50%. Here's 80%.
Fair enough.
And that's what it took. And they're still upgrading them because people are being more, innovative on the other side. So, that's the thing I would look at is technologists can get so focused they miss the point of why somebody's paying for that technology and how it can be employed. And I think that's part of the job of the technical point of contact and the people that they're working for on this job.
That's great, Richard. Thank you. Doug, any last thoughts on this topic?
Oh, I love what Richard's saying. I gotta agree with that. It's what I'm thinking of is one of our recent successes, and they've been pretty forward with all the stuff they're doing. This isn't the only one, but it's a company called TechShot, and they've been doing a lot of great work with NASA and for NASA, and including a couple of years ago, we come for the bone densitometer, which was they were taking X-ray machines and putting them up in space specifically to measure the bone density of mice, right? And lately, I think it was sometime in the last couple of months, there was articles coming out there talking about the great research that they're doing. And it's not necessarily, I want to be clear, it's not what TechShot is doing. They're not doing this research. What they've done is they've supplied the X-ray machine, and other companies are reaching out and using this machine to do the research. So that creates kind of that commercialization pipeline. It took TechShot looking for different ways, looking for how can we apply what we know in different fashions, not just like saying there are companies who are very successful at saying we do our one thing and we're going to bore down and we're going to keep doing this one thing and we'll keep hammer to nail on that as long as we can. And the ones that are successful, that is great. Sorry, that's great. Other ones I've seen where I think it really works is when the company's able to look broadly, not just looking at what one agency can use, or maybe even, like I say, some of our agencies, there's a pretty broad scope within the agency. And so maybe it's one center can be used one way, another center can be used another way. So yeah, it's all about keeping that open mind with us.
It makes sense. It makes sense. Doug, I'd like to come straight back to you and then get everyone else's perspective as well for this next one. And this is a topic that's come up from a number of attendees. Without a doubt, SBIRs and STTRs are a fantastic way to fund a company going forward as they're going through this stage of life, especially if Uncle Sam is their end goal in terms of a purchaser. But that does also put a lot of entrepreneurs in a world where they have their blinders on to other funding sources and other resource opportunities as they go forward. I'd love to just explore with the panel a little bit how, one, to take those blinders off a little bit, and what else might be out there to help augment their journey.
Well, I think to start off, taking the blinders is showing up to panels like this, coming in, listening, hearing what everybody can say, because we're all going to give different views and different ways that you can move within and without the program or outside the program. I know with SBIR, we've talked about it several times. A lot of people come to us and say, I build X and I want to build X for NASA. And that's all they're doing. We just want to build it. We just want to do this. We want to do this with NASA. They're like, so what are the ways that we can get in doing this? And we very quickly go, well, how many people, how big is this company? Like, well, it's just me. Great, SBIR, so that's what I'm saying. So once you're in, though, you've built your thing, you've worked in your phases through the SBIR, then you've got this, I would say you've come into the family, to other places in NASA, to other projects, things like that. They're going to look and say, well, this is someone who's, essentially been vetted through the SBIR program. So let's reach out, let's get that contact. And that's something I always try to impress upon, is that, you got to keep the blinders off. You got to keep you looking, but at the same time, it's just keep pushing in to get into it. Okay.
Sounds great. Patricia, can we kick over to you?
Sure. So the emphasis on that stakeholder community is what that sounds like to me. Blinders have to come off, because you've got champions, you've got technology champions, you've got other investors around the agency that you may not even know about. And when I say investors, I mean customers. And then you go to I like the suggestion of the ManTech programs, and some of those other, America Makes is another great program if you're in the technology space. And I got involved with national industry associations like the National Center for Manufacturing Sciences. They're in the Dayton, I think they're Cleveland area. One of those places way up north where the sun doesn't shine like it does down here, and my brain doesn't work as well when I'm up there. Just joking. Anyway, I think that those organizations, they bring collaboration potential. I mean, industry associations got formed, particularly back in the day in the DoD, so that interface could happen in an outside of a far regulated environment, right? So you had no acquisition rules moderating how you go talk to the guys from Lockheed or Raytheon, and they are excellent investors. They're very likely going to be part of your adoption path if you're in the defense business, because Air Force doesn't build airplanes. Boeing and Lockheed and other guys build them. In the Navy, other guys build the ships. You got to know the other guys, and they are for sure. I think an earlier panel mentioned, the databases of what that Lockheed puts out, et cetera. And you've had speakers at this conference from some of those folks, and it works. They can be inside of a large corporation advocating your SBIR and finding your customers in Lockheed Boeing. That's hard maneuvering, right? If you're just a little guy outside a standard SBIR company, I'm not sure if we want to call ourselves that anymore, but because it kind of has a connotation of companies that repeat SBIR business and never take anything forward. But I like to think that SBIR companies come in with the right motivation. Anyway, those big, large partners, they can be investors and help you get over that valley of death, get adopted. They're going to look at you carefully before they bring you into their fold, and it plays well with your agency customer, right? When you get those two people talking and advocating and identifying gaps and risks and problems, then you're in a real dialogue. You've got a direction to go, problems to go solve, and things to put on your roadmap, as we talked about before.
That's great. Thank you, Patricia. Eric, any thoughts on taking off our blinders and thinking more expansively than just SBIR money?
Yeah, so I think this is critical to that transition. I think for companies that are on SBIR, and say you're on your phase 2, you're trying to get to a phase 3. The problem is very different from getting from a phase 1 to a phase 2, where you're proving the potential for the idea, the suitability for it. Now you're trying to get it to become a program, and particularly in the DoD, that's a really challenging thing. Other places, I'm sure Doug can talk about NASA, tend to be, it's more center specific, and so you have a smaller pool that you have to influence there. But in DoD, you have this internecine network of people who often have very deep relationships with each other. There are competing programs. There's politics across services or within services you have to manage, and you also have to understand the bureaucracy that you are now operating within. And that bureaucracy has some unwritten rules of the road of what's proper and what isn't. But it also just has some very rigid processes. You know, the funding cycle is a 2-year out funding cycle that you really have to start influencing a year prior to that 2-year clock beginning. So really, it's set 2 years out. It starts 3 years out. But your phase 1 in the Air Force's case is 3 months. Your phase 2 is 15. How do you influence something that's 18 months before you're awarded? Hence the problem. This gets back to the Valley of Death question. So you have to be really working hard to find areas that are critical pain points so that people can reprogram their plans to give you that bridge to get to that bridge, that extra 18 months that you have to hit. And so that's a process, but you also have to start influencing the bigger, broader community there to get that, you know, the real money that we're actually after here. So the phase 2 is nice, but it just builds a product that doesn't sell it.
It makes sense. Richard, any last thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, actually, earlier today, John Williams mentioned when he was at Navy, they had a kind of we call it a SBIR transition program.
Yeah.
Where basically a company is hired to teach you about the environment you're dealing with and help you navigate through the bureaucracy. Understand what goes on at a field activity versus a headquarters versus the Pentagon. And that's a very valuable education. You also get an advocate for you that helps you understand, you know, what it's like to give the elevator speech versus the academic presentation versus the sales pitch. And they try to outfit you to be successful in getting your innovation recognized on a broader scale and understand the environment that you're dealing in. So I always recommend companies who get a phase 2 to start that, okay, because it's a good way to learn. Second thing is that if companies have at least one phase 2 and they have another, now I start talking to them about using TABA. That's used to be called Discretionary Technical Assistance, but now for a phase 2, you can get up to $50,000 to bring in a technical guru to help explain things to you or to move you forward. It allows a good down payment on whatever cyber security systems you're going to need to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Helps you become a better company to be able to move on, like an ISO 9000 certification or a CMMI level 4 software outfit. So depending on what stage you are and if you're a repeat phase 2er, the answers are a little different. But there's a lot of opportunity there that really help as part of the federal system. And then, of course, the states will often give you some seed money on their own to help you get a boost when you win a phase 1 or your phase 2.
Great point, Richard.
Oh, sorry, Eric, please.
I just said great point. Sorry.
Well, it's a really good point. Richard, I'd like to stay with you for a second if I can. This next piece, I know you and I in the past have talked about this, and I really valued your perspective. We've talked a little bit about the pitfalls, the problems. We've also talked about the opportunities to span from phase 2 to phase 3. All of this is made better with good champions. I'd like to hear a little bit from everyone about what a good champion looks like through this process. How do we find good champions? What does a good champion do for companies as they move through this process? Richard, I know you and I have touched on this. Could I put you on the spot?
Yeah, well, you know, a champion, first off, as part of your plan for success, you shouldn't count on your technical point of contact on your job to do that thinking and planning for you. They are very interested in the technical performance of what you're supposed to do. And so you need to go the step up beyond them, and that's often, somebody who wrote the topic, somebody who is hoping to see it succeed so that they can apply it to a problem. And that champion is the one you've got to look at, and hopefully they will know what acquisition documentation is required and what money is kind of required, and actually have a plan for your success. I find champions who are just technically oriented, and they reach out for help to find somebody to help hand it off to. I also find others that are driven from the top down. When I do what I call my in-reach efforts, I look for those champions, and I ask program managers, you can use the SBIR program for risk reduction. You can use it for technology insertion and performance improvements. You can use it to solve obsolescence issues if you're in the life cycle part of the business. And you can also use it as a tool to introduce competition where you have none. And so those are very valuable tools that aren't just technical oriented from a manager standpoint. And I look for an individual who recognizes that, the contracting value, the ability to have money awarded in relatively short times to pick up, and the flexibility of the program to find solutions, not just within your own portfolio, but within others. So, somebody mentioned earlier that an SBIR company is always selling, and they need to be. And the more people who know that you're there and you have a good track record of managing your contract, you're going to find people willing to give you a try.
That's great, and I love the breadth of that as well, Richard, because it touches on so many different people. Doug, I'd like to take this to you. I certainly would hope that NASA, from a champion standpoint, means that we just all get to work with astronauts, but I'm sure that's not the real answer.
No, it doesn't. But the good news is there's a lot of experts in a lot of different little areas, and in fact, just talk about this stuff. My mind just started going in a million different places. So I'll back up a second. Earlier, you all talking about TABA. Richard's mentioned TABA, and I'll say I know in the solicitation for this year, it's out now. There's TABA available via NASA, so that's also a program that's going on there. When it comes to champions, I think of this one story when I was working with a company and doing some research on a product they did that was really successful. They built something for NASA, nanotubes or something like that, and then afterwards they sold it to bike companies and hockey sticks or something like, but it's the material processes they did, and they made their good money off it, right? So it was a great success. But I was looking at it and I said, why didn't this go further? What happened here? I really was curious. Why did we stop it? And I think it was either the phase 2 or the phase 2E. Like it went straight into, we're selling it to other people. And what they told me, they said, very bluntly, they said, it's just, the person who's their champion at NASA died. Which is, you're like, wait, what? I feel horrible for it. But that's where they're saying it's, for them, that avenue, once that person and their expertise had moved out, it was then trying to find that other person in there, And for them, they had the commercial offboard or whatever, so they went into that direction instead. I absolutely advocate working with the champions, which is, we call them cores, we also call them TPOCs. It's also just not only you want to work with them. I would say you want to be honest with the technology. There are times where you get to a phase 2, or even I've seen a phase 1, and everybody just kind of looks around and says, yeah, this isn't really doing what we want. And I've found that companies that are honest about that end of it usually tend to do better in the program, because everybody's accepting it. And usually if you can do one thing, you can do another, I'm thinking of this one company from way back when we were just starting with Robonaut in the early 2000s and stuff. And at the time, speaking of astronauts, what their idea was that Robonaut would be controlled by an astronaut, right? So the astronaut would have goggles on or some sort of thing, and they'd be able to work with the Robonaut. But the problem was the field of vision was really horrible back then. And so this company came in, and they were working with it, and they really improved it. They took it about as far as you could at that time, right? There was issues with bandwidth and stuff. Like I said, this was like the early 2000s, so you could only do so much. But then I think it was years later, Razer came in, the gaming giant Razer came in and said, hey, I saw what you did there. Let's apply it to goggles and stuff and virtual reality and augmented reality, and let's see if we can get that working. So it's that whole, you've got to have your champions. Absolutely. I know it sounds like a cliche. The company is the biggest champion. You know, it's you're your own best, you know, friend and your own cheerleading squad. And while you've got to be honest, you've got to work with those cores and their TPOCs. You also got to look for other avenues to take this stuff in.
No, that's great, Doug. I'd like to go to Patricia next on the topic of champions, but before we do, Doug, could you just take 20 seconds and elaborate on one of your points you brought up, and that's the fit of champions to the companies. What does one do if the fit isn't there, and what's a corrective action a company might take?
Oh yeah, I know. I was talking to this one company. They actually they had a phase 2, and they were wondering who their TPOC was, and I was like, what's going on here? You know, so yeah, absolutely, that can happen, and that's where I think is like you start talking, you know, you start working with it. The TPOC is not the only person. While they're your primary focus, they are not your only person in there. If there isn't a good fit, reach out to it. You know, extend those and see what's going on there. But also, I do like to say, keep in mind, once you're in, you're in. So just because the TPOC maybe didn't work perfectly this time, doesn't mean that it won't work perfectly next time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Patricia, thoughts on champions?
So I wanted to jump on a point about persisting with your champions and looking around. So an experience and who are the agency's customers. So I had an SBIR. It's a great project with the Defense Logistics Agency, and we were invited for a phase 2. And our business model, and we were declined that phase 2. They had multiple awards, and they were only going to fund a couple. Huge disappointment, but it's like, well, wait a minute. The weaknesses they identified are it's their agency's business model. So I happened to be at another conference, and everything always goes well on Coronado Island. If you've ever been to a conference there on the naval base there, it's a great place to go, and everything always goes well. And it did for me there too. I met an Air Force contact who was running an innovation shop at the depot. Different business model completely. Same technology, but his perspective was different. So guess what? We were able to get them to rewrite a scope of work back to the DLA, and the DLA funded it because who's the DLA's customer? The DoD. And so I found them a customer to advocate and then and to support and accept and work with us, and that's what's going on right now for my client. And it's a fantastic way of seeing how the SBIR program. And some of you folks, both of you, Robert and Eric, Doug, are both in the system. So you know this, but some people out there just don't. You know, it's a vehicle. It's a contract vehicle. It's a method to be, and you're in the in crowd, right? You've got one. Well, I've already got one. You know, people can tap into it. So that's what we were able to execute. It was hard work. It pushed the timeline out a good 8 months, but it's good money. It's a good project. We have an embedded opportunity. I can't say they're customers yet because the SBIR program is funding them, but we have an opportunity to gain a giant customer set because of this. So it can work in ways that you haven't ever thought of, and it was also feeling the disappointment of being denied when we were so optimistic, and we didn't let that stop us. We found other champions, we found another agency, and we found our customer's customer, and that's important too.
That's a really fantastic point, Patricia. Thank you for bringing that up and surfacing that. Eric, any final thoughts on the topic of champions?
Yeah, that's a great story, Patricia. I say just find a range of strategic partners to solve the problems you're going to face. And like Patricia was talking about, sometimes you come across antibodies and your idea is just too transformative. It challenges too many rice bowls. And you need to think broadly about who your champion is. And it may be that the person who controls the budget just doesn't see it the way that you see it. Even they may be wrong, and somewhere in these department buddies like you got to go find that person. The other option too is to find somebody inside your company or associate with your company who can explain it perhaps better than you do, because they understand the personalities, the bureaucracy, again those kind of written and unwritten rules that are out there of how to navigate it. And so a lot of times it can just be the communication style or anything like that. So, that could be where you bring in some outside help, or you look to somebody on your team who has that deep background, the deep understanding of the mission set. I from my time working on the AFWERX team, I probably reviewed over 1,000 SBIR applications. It's stunning how few people understand the problem they're trying to solve, even at the basic level. So just getting a little bit of expertise can go a long way to bridging that gap when you're sitting across the table from somebody who spent 25, 30 years in this problem. They understand it deeply, and you're telling them how to do it better. You just don't have credibility unless you have somebody who has credibility with that person. So, and so just recognize that, and that's who your champion needs to be.
That's a great parallel to that too. We're going to go over to Q&A here in just a couple of minutes, but to kind of round out this portion of the panel before we start taking some of the audience questions, I had a dear professor a million years ago that liked to end every one of our sessions with the one key point or some one piece to remember no matter what. Just real briefly, 20 seconds each. Patricia, I'd like to start with you. What's the one big takeaway you'd like people to remember under the topic that we're talking about today, the commercialization of innovation and moving beyond that phase 2? What's the one key point?
It's a business development effort. And if you prefer the word BD to sales, then use it, but do it. It's really important that you have to go and find your customers. And they will help lead you into commercialization, and you can push it with them. And so it's not a gun-shy business at all. You got to get out there and do it.
Sounds great. Thank you. Eric, key point?
Yeah, I would say just think about the word community. It's not about the team, that's your team. It's about the stakeholders that are involved, some of whom will and won't agree with you. And it's about navigating the process to get to help the agency you're working with come to the decision that you want them to come to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Richard, the one thing we should all remember.
Perform to your contract. We often find, not often, is you're measured on your ability to manage a contract. A phase 2 might be $1.5 million, and that means reports and schedules and meeting your delivery dates. And if you can't do that, then nobody's going to give you $10 million. So make sure you execute the contract and comply with the contract. Because even if your technology is great, they're not going to give you money if you can't demonstrate you can manage it.
That's a really critical point. Thank you. Doug, any last thoughts for that key point to remember before we go to Q&A?
Mine's going to be more functional. Sorry. I'm going to tell you it's sbir.nasa.gov. This is where our solicitation is. This is where all the information is kept. So please go check that out, sbir.nasa.gov.
Thank you, one and all. I believe Dell's going to help facilitate some of the Q&A questions from the audience. Dell, are you there?
Yes, I am. So, we've had a few really good questions. One of the ones that came in was, so someone wanted to know essentially how much information do they need to make a really good kind of effort for that commercialization, for pushing forward. Do they need to get down into the nitty gritty, such as, price point, projected sales, stuff like that? They have a technology that's needed, and they've got an interest from multiple circles, but what makes for that good? Here is my transition. Here's what I know about it. Here is the data I currently have.
So I can take that. So I think what it comes down to is having a sound project plan, and that is solicitation specific. Different agencies want different levels of depth, and they also afford you differing levels of page count to go into that depth. And so you have to hit the right depth to clearly show that you understand the problem and that you understand the complexity that you're getting into, and that you're serious about it. But at the same time, you don't want, I think, as somebody this morning made the point, you don't want to make it sound like it's easy. You have all the answers. There's no discovery to be made. Part of the point of SBIR is that you're supposed to be developing new technology. So, so if it is not transformative, you can actually start hurting your argument in some ways. And that's not to say you want to hide anything. It's just to say you need to be pushing some boundaries here. That's what the money's for. So I would say that it's really hard to give a single answer without getting into the specific situation, but it's really about getting the right level of detail and understanding what the agency is asking for in the solicitation.
Okay. Does any of the other panelists want to jump in on that before we move to the next one?
I would just only add, when we talked a little bit earlier about communication and how you explain your technology and getting an inside picture and how important that is. And it's like the double-edged sword of keyword search capability. A word to a scientist may mean something very different to someone who's operationally deploying that. What is that user story, right? What is the user's perspective? And you can miss completely, and you see it all the time. So if a person has very good data, and it sounds like the person who asked the question has done a lot of very good homework and understands those needs, I guess I would only just suggest to validate that, to come in with the perspective of validating what you think you know or what you've gotten from others. Because you're still learning. You're learning for a long time in this process, and you're learning what your customer needs and how they want to adopt it. So sounds like that person's doing very well, and they should capitalize on that learning to learn more with more people, I guess. Yeah, broader.
So there was another question that came up that was really kind of focused towards commercialization plans and what makes them great. And you'll talked a lot about that. And the hard thing with telling people what's a good commercialization plan, of course, is that across the 12 different agencies or departments that you could be putting together a proposal for, their metrics for commercialization plans and what they like to see varies widely. So I would like to flip the script a little bit on that question, and rather than what makes a commercialization plan, what do each of you think makes a really good transition plan? So how do they take that commercialization plan and how do they successfully put it into practice? Y'all skirted a lot around, kind of these points during the panel, but, if you could just sum it up, where do you think that transition point is? What do you think is a key factor for it? And how can people be successful?
Well, let me take a shot at that, Del. We ran into a lot of, I'll call it a general case here, writing a business plan that has a business case analysis that shows, and you can do it. You can say, hey, these black boxes you are having me make, I'm making them with today's technology. It's cheaper for you to replace old ones rather than solve the obsolescence issues in them. And do a business case. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it conveys the fact that the work you've already done under SBIR has got applications in other places, and makes a financial sense, regardless of the technology involved. The other area, in a similar point, is if you're making a black box that goes on a submarine, that's great. But we only build one submarine a year, so it's not a big market for you. But if we've got 50 boats running around at sea today, think about when you're designing this product or process that's applicable to the next generation, and figure out how you can make a backfit market that's got 50 customers standing there waiting for you of that. And so that's kind of the business case analysis of just being able to market your product to a broader audience. One of the things that I used to do is when I would put a phase 3 contract in place, I would put a contract in place with a lot of extra ceiling. And the rationale was that if I had a cybersecurity solution for a submarine, there's probably somebody in the surface ship world who would be able to adopt it and use it, or somebody on an aircraft carrier. And so I would give it contract ceiling so that we could pool the resources one place and get some synergy between the 3 different commands, all that build off the same core of the company's innovative cyber solution. So those are different techniques, but they just don't happen. The champion you're working with inside the government, as well as your creativity and recognizing other markets, have to work together.
Right, and I want to build on that because I think that's a great one. I know NASA, obviously, we have the same issue where it's like going back to the space shuttle era where you're like, well, we only have like 3 to 5 shuttles. We don't need a ton of these. You might need a free shuttle, you might need a couple of extra ones to test on, and that's it. So it really becomes more a challenge of saying, once you've gone through this, can you take this product, and now that you've done a lot of extra testing on it, that to be able to certify it to go fly, are there other ways you can use it? Now, I'll tell you, most of the small businesses we talk to, they look directly back into DoD. They look into that submarine and stuff, and that's where they're initially coming to us and saying, this is what we're thinking of. I will think one of the things that I see is they don't even think submarine, they think Navy, naval research, they think that. And I keep pushing back on them. It'll help us to understand your company and how much you've thought it through. But it's also just a good exercise for you to say, we know everything has some sort of military application. There's a lot of back and forth there, just by virtue of what everybody's doing. But like I say, specifically, be a little more specific. Go into it. Do that extra thought. Where in the military is it? Is it in the submarine? Is it on a drone? Is this to help? There's a lot of stuff that we do that's astronaut health. Is this for soldier health? Don't just think too broadly. That's one of the things. Get down in there and think, where's the next step for it?
Cool. Great. Any other thoughts on that question, or Del, do we have another?
I got loads of questions. Keep on coming, so just let me know.
I have a point to make, though, along those lines. It's really, when you have a solicitation to win, right, you're competing still at phase 2, and they're asking for a commercialization plan. You do have a TPOC already, a TPOC. I heard you use that language. Ask them what they want to see. You got to ask them, what do you want to see? So there's the commercialization plan that's in your proposal. And the personality of your customer set has a lot to do with what they like to see. There's also your company's sales plan and business development roadmap, and that should be built into it. But if you have a customer that's really bent on commercialization and they want to see it, think about making a plan that is tailored to what they want to see and that you can report on at each monthly or quarterly review that you have with your customer. Structure it so that you can give them updates, and it should sync well with your corporate business development plan, so you're putting resources and attention on it. And so that would just be another recommendation along those that was triggered by your discussion, Doug. Thank you.
So
just one last point on that. You know, the Air Force is leading the SBIR process and trying to bridge that 18-month gap that I described. And they have these two programs called TACFI and STRATFI for basically smaller and larger levels of award. They both require a level of outside investment to engage the additional SBIR funds that they bring in. If you don't have a commercialization plan, you're not going to get commercial investment. It's just that simple. So, you know, and I mean the big C commercialization plan, not the one that transitions you into a phase 3 with the government. It's you know, being able to sell it to the outside world. So, you know, increasingly, you know, I think we're going to see, you know, the Army has, you know, started Army Futures Command. The last couple of months, I've seen them really start to gain some traction. I would expect to see in the next year or so some sort of a similar program. I don't have any sort of insight into that, but I would just bet they're going to follow in those footsteps. The Navy just launched Naval X. You know, I think the other agencies are starting to look at what DoD has done here, and I think the landscape over the next few years is going to change pretty dramatically. So, you know, for companies that are traditionally engaging in the SBIR process, I think now is the time to start gaining those skills to branch outside of the government for that broader level of commercialization. And ultimately, that serves all of our interests. You know, it's hopefully in every American's interest that NASA is very successful. But you can't build a company building 5 widgets for the shuttle program. That's just not going to work. So you have to be able to bridge this to the outside world so that you can keep producing widgets for NASA, for example. So. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up STRATFI, Eric, because one of the questions that came in from the audience was actually directly addressing that, and they wanted to know about barriers from a contracting perspective in regards to company size, since it does require the VC injection or VC capital. Have you seen any of those? Do you know of any issues that smaller companies have faced when they've gone after that vehicle? And then to build on that, since that is that phase 3, we've actually had another question about phase 3s. And does anybody have any kind of best practices to approach that phase 3 process?
So I'll answer that in 2 parts, because I think it's a very nuanced question, and it comes down to the individual situation. But you know, I think as soon as you are on a phase 1, you need to start thinking about the phase 3 plan, and obviously the first step in a phase 1 is proving feasibility and starting to win over a stakeholder. But you really have to understand what that stakeholder wants before you're ever going to prove feasibility. But so now I'm on a phase 2. I'm trying to get to a phase 3. I think what you need to be thinking about is, like I said earlier, the boss's boss. Is the permission? How does it connect into a lot of different things? If you're going after STRATFI in particular, you need to be thinking very big picture. You probably ought to be disrupting some sort of a core business process in the Air Force. And that means you need to be building a really broad base of support, and you're just going to have to be really aggressive about that. You got to be ready for some antibodies to show up, and you also you know, just need to have a large circle of friends. You know, hopefully this is a more positive experience too. You know, be thinking about you know, that may be actually the time to start thinking about engaging with your local congressional representatives to think about how do we start putting this into the defense budget. If it's especially for a STRATFI thing, you know, you're talking turning something into a large program. But you also need to be thinking about, how do I build a team? How do I scale? This is why VC involvement is a requirement. You're going to have to get much, much bigger than you probably are right now. And so, the era of the 10 or 15 person shop being able to service that sort of a thing, I don't know that it ever existed. So you're going to have to get a much bigger team, and that itself raises some risks. And it's one of these things where the government starts saying, this is really good, interesting technology, but it's really only proven itself in this small case. So how do you tell the story that this small case is going to be instructive for the much, much larger case? And just recognize you're trying to change, in the case of STRATFI, a 660,000 person organization. That's a big problem. So you need to be thinking very, very big.
That's an interesting thought, Eric. I know we have less than a minute left. Would anyone like the final thought on this question?
Oh, this is Mac. One comment is that in the Navy, we haven't seen much success in that area because turns out venture capitalists aren't happy with 7 to 10% fee. They're looking for 25%. And so we just don't see them. And so we find our companies tend to be DoD companies that are willing to work within the DoD, guidelines for fee. And I think the other thing on the phase threes, one lesson that is learned is to try to make sure that phase three has enough ceiling to do what you want and allows for R&D and then every other color money. So, OPN, WPN, at least in Navy, other procurement Navy, new construction Navy, operation and maintenance funds, WP weapons funds, whatever it is, so that anybody who wants to take advantage of your innovative product or process can have a very flexible vehicle to give you money and do work under it.
That's great, Richard. Thank you very much. I know this forum and doing this virtually due to COVID has made it a little bit awkward. Please let me, on behalf of the many, many hundreds and hundreds of people that have been watching this panel, say thank you, Doug, Patricia, Richard, Eric, for your expertise, your time, your insight. This has been incredibly valuable. I'm sure everyone watching from their home offices, their living rooms, or wherever they are thought so as well. Thank you very much for supporting this and being such tremendous panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Del.
Yeah, no problem. So, just to echo Scott again, thank all of y'all for being part of our panel today and really just being part of our summit. We think it's doing a really great job of showcasing all of the organizations, all of the assistance, all of the help, everybody that feeds into this thriving innovation ecosystem that we have. And, how do we become better players in that? How do we, push forward with better information? So kind of with that thought in mind, we're going to let everyone take a really quick break for lunch, some time to, step away from your computer screen, kind of distill these thoughts, think about where you need that assistance. What is your barrier? What is keeping you from being a bigger part of being a thriving business in this innovation-based economy? So during the lunch break, we're actually going to have a presentation on cybersecurity standards and practices from Aletha McNamara, and it's going to begin roughly in 15 minutes. Before that, though, we're going to show two videos, one from Senator Tom Udall and one from Representative Xochitl Small. So I'll be right back to show those videos. As soon as those videos get done playing, hopefully they won't repeat. Unfortunately, can't control that one. But we'll be right back at 12:45 with Alethea to talk about those standards, those practices, and why they're really critical for what you need to succeed and move forward.